Welcome to Speechley Bircham. My name is Tim Raper. I'm a partner at the firm. I head up our real estate construction and projects practices. Speechley Bircham are a fan of Midtown. We're a fan of Midtown Business Club. I've been with the firm longer than I care to remember, but when I joined the firm, we were based in Fleet Street in a rather old, dilapidated building. We decided to move further up Midtown, if I can put it like that, and we moved to St Andrew Street to a new development put up by Helical Bar, and then we decided to, I think for better, in 2008 to move to this fantastic building in New Street Square developed by Land Securities. And I only say I think so, and that's just because of the economic climate rather than the nature of the development of the building, which we're very happy with. This morning's debate, which we've got a fantastic turnout for, is refurbish or rebuild. And I think that's the position looking at it generally, and in particular in the context of the Midtown. I would just like to mention that a lot of bright lights here. You're being filmed, and I'm told that the film, after it's edited and all totally abusive comments are removed, it's going to be put on YouTube for those who like to spend their time looking on YouTube. Anyway, moving on. I'm not allowed to take a position on this particular debate. I'm just chairing it, but I did have a quick look last night, and there was an interesting comment by Max Fordham on the subject. What he said, and I'll just read it out: "My instinct is to explore the refurbishment option, reuse, recycle, and rethink. These have to become things we get more skilled at in the 21st century. When we do new build, we should do with an eye to longevity and adaptability." And I think that's a good place to start from. I'm also delighted this morning to welcome, we've got 4 great speakers from firms who are connected with the Midtown. I've asked each of them to spend no more than between 7 and 10 minutes, and they are going to say a little bit about themselves, but I've told them that will eat into their 10 minutes. And we're going to have questions at the end, provided there's not an overrun, and I'm going to try and make sure that doesn't happen. We have 2 speakers for the case for rebuild. They are Natalie Roberts, the Environment Manager from Land Securities, and Mark Ansley, a partner from Fairbrother, who's responsible for the leasing and the acquisition team at the firm. On the refurbishment side, we have Claire Wildfire, Master Planning Director from Mott MacDonald, and Alistair Don, Principal Energy Engineer from Wilmot Dixon. I think we're going to kick off, and when we get to the end and we've had questions, and if I remember, we're going to have a vote. It's not going to be controversial, this discussion, but we hope we make a little bit of intelligent comment on the subject, and please do participate at the end. And if we get through to the end, please come and join us for a coffee afterwards. And I think we are going to start with Natalie.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm an Environment Manager at Land Securities, and I focus mostly on the development side of the business across London and retail. As Tim said, I'm presenting the case for rebuild. So in terms of the decision of whether or not to refurbish or rebuild, basically it depends what you start with. So sometimes it's worth investing your time, energy and money because you can see yourself driving around in this classic for many years to come. Okay, it might not have the most cutting edge technology, it may not perform as well, and also may not have all the safety features of a new car, but the pros outweigh the cons. Sometimes it's just not worth investing your time, energy and money. But it doesn't matter what you can do, you just can't compete with brand new. So you've got a blank canvas where you can incorporate the latest design and technology innovations and learn from previous mistakes. Here, by the way, is a Porsche Spider 918. It's a hybrid plug-in supercar, which goes from 0 to 60 in about 2.8 seconds, has a carbon emissions of 79 grams per kilometre and a fuel economy of 86 miles per gallon. Enough about cars. So just back to buildings, here's a few examples from our development portfolio. So just nearby to us is One New Street Square, or at least it was One New Street Square. It's currently being demolished. There were 3 buildings of varying heights, but their diverse shapes limited the opportunity to maximise the net lettable area. Their floor plates sizes were too small for an open plan office, and the existing buildings and respective floor levels didn't all line up. The low floor to floor height also added to the problem with not being able to accommodate modern building services systems. So this is what we're planning to do afterwards. The floor space overall is increased by about 60%. But in terms of environmental performance, we've incorporated glazed facades which maximise daylighting, solar control glazing which minimises the solar heat gain to the building, solar shading. At the end of the completion of the project, we'll achieve BREEAM Very Good as a minimum. We've got incorporated low flow water fixtures and fittings and a grey water recycling system, and we've got green roofs and planted terraces to provide amenity space for the occupiers and enhance biodiversity. That's just a few of the sustainability credentials for that building. 1 and 2 New Ludgate, which is just down the road. So before, we had 2 1960s office buildings. As with all developments, we carried out an extensive refurbishment feasibility assessment, but essentially it came down to the limited floor to ceiling heights and inflexible floor space, just like One New Street Square. When we finished, and you'll notice it's already started construction on this building, we'll have high quality offices and retail accommodation with a total floor area of about 380,000 square feet. In terms of sustainability, we've got a combination of Grade A offices and extensive retail, which provide enhanced employment opportunities for the local community. Energy efficient design, we've got PV and CHP to provide low carbon and zero carbon energy to the building. Solar control glazing, new publicly accessible open space, as you can see in the front there. We've got 117 secure bicycle parking spaces and associated showers and locker facilities. The offices will achieve BREEAM Excellent in the end. And probably the best example of iconic design. So the previous building at 20 Fenchurch Street was completed in 1968. The tower building was 92 metres high, 24 stories and about 350,000 square feet. The offices had reached the end of their useful life, and the floor-to-floor heights, as with the previous examples, were insufficient to allow for modern building services systems. And again, the floor plates were too narrow and inflexible to meet the current demands of the market. So after, we've got an iconic building that's transformed the area. The new tower is 160 metres high and 38 stories. 32 of the stories are office floors, 2 are the entrance lobby, and 3 a sky garden at the top. It now has 690,000 square feet of net lettable area. That's about double what was there previously. The reason why it's almost doubled without it actually increasing by double in height is because of the innovative design, which actually goes wider as you go up. So here's a view from the sky garden at the top. So we've got a botanical garden that's incorporated into the top of the building. It'll be the highest public park in London. And there's another view across the river. In terms of sustainability features, there's a 300 kilowatt natural gas-fired fuel cell incorporated into the building, which is one of the few in London. I think there's one in elsewhere in London, but essentially it's integrated with an absorption chiller, and that will provide again low carbon energy to the building. And there's a PV array also integrated into the building. Overall, it's achieving an energy efficiency of about 15% better than 2010 building regulations, even though the prevalent building regulations at the time of the design commencing was actually 2006. We've got, again, water conservation measures. We've got 377 secure bicycle parking spaces, and at the end of completion, we expect it to achieve BREEAM Excellent. So why rebuild? Well, first of all, you can achieve better environmental performance overall than refurbishing. You can achieve a more energy efficient design. You can incorporate the latest innovative technologies. You can build in flexibility and adaptability as what the current market demands. We use sustainably sourced construction materials in our buildings, build desirable living, working and social spaces for people. We've also demonstrated that you can actually use land more efficiently, and you can build iconic, transformative buildings. Just to say, we do also refurbish. So here's an example from Victoria Street. That's the before picture of 123 Victoria, and that's the after. So what we did there was we replaced the glazing and upgraded the services system, enhancing the energy performance of the building, but essentially we started off with something that we could just improve slightly and was still very attractive to the market. Okay.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And I know the caveat at the end. I'm sure no one would have missed that. Anyway, thank you. Claire?
Okay, thank you. I'm Claire Wildfire, and I'm from Mott MacDonald, so consulting engineers. And I suppose my background is I can do low impact buildings and I can do low impact big city scale. And actually it's the link between the two that's the exciting bit. As bringing the sort of consultant perspective, I wanted to first start with a discussion about the decision drivers that will be considered at the outset. And the first thing is the graph on the left, which actually the purpose of this debate, I think, comes slightly from the fact that the government has declared that from 2018 it won't be possible to let buildings with an energy performance certificate of worse than band D. And this graph just shows why the government is restricting carbon emissions from existing buildings. And it's because basically it shows that if we are to reduce carbon emissions by 80% by 2050, which is what the government is legally binded to do, then we're all going to have to act. Every sector is going to have to do something as shown by that graph. And then the other thing is the design quality indicator sort of aspect, which is effectively the design drivers which are used to make decisions and sort of set the definition of performance and success. So they cover things like build quality and performance, the functionality of the building, and the impact as in the sense of place that the building will generate. And quite often these indicators are used to determine that a building, an existing building, wouldn't support these aspects and needs to be knocked down in order to create them. But arguably, actually, even with new build, the sort of focus on cost and programme means that the end result doesn't actually always serve those indicators as any better than the existing building. So with that in mind, I wanted to run through a building just up the road that we've worked on. And this prime office location in Cannon Street, but suffered from low floor to ceiling height, dark floor plates, limited wheelchair accessibility, and a sort of not very extensive ground floor presence. The main reason for the decision to refurbish rather than rebuild was to do with the lack of added benefit of additional floors to be built on the building, because there was the restriction in height because of the locality near St Paul's. And actually, arguably, if it had been the decision to knock down and start again, because actually the floor-to-floor height was only 3 metres, it probably would have resulted in one less floor because of the fact that people wouldn't, in their right minds, wouldn't build with that floor-to-floor height. So the other sort of restrictions were the structural grid was 2.4 metres as opposed to the 3 metres that's usually used today. So those were the restrictions. So what did we do? Here's the end result, something drastically different that we were able to achieve in a refurb. So the main thing was the fully glazed facade that was done for the daylight aspect. It was triple glazed in the end. That was a decision taken on whole life cost benefit because of the improved energy performance and the significant improvement on air tightness that you can get. It was fully refurbished in terms of efficient services, efficient lighting, controls, heat recovery, aspects like that. It achieved energy performance band B and BREEAM Excellent. And I think the thing here is what it demonstrates is that if you allow the consultants to focus their ingenuity on protecting or preserving our existing assets, you get something fantastic like this building. And one thing I was impressed about was the brief built in a desire for flexibility. Because what worries me about buildings these days, the new buildings, is that the brief is so focused on a sort of optimization of the functionality that the building fits like a glove to the brief. That's a snapshot in time, but it's sort of got built-in obsolescence because what it doesn't allow then is flexibility. So it effectively creates the vicious circle because then it's not fit for purpose in another 10 years when the needs are different and then it has to be knocked down again. So this focus on flexibility, which was part of the design brief here, was actually one of the significant factors in its success. And it was fully pre-let prior to practical completion, and then the building was sold just after practical completion. So definitely a success. So my final slide, I sort of wanted to touch on some metrics. So what I've sort of demonstrated is that in terms of both those decision drivers that I raised at the beginning, like the energy performance and the design quality aspects, that building satisfies them. But say, for example, the decision relating to sustainability of whether you should knock down a building and start again or improve the existing one often comes down to the idea of improved energy performance of a poorly performing building, offsetting the embodied carbon of rebuilding that building. But what we can now demonstrate is you don't need to knock a building down to drastically improve the energy performance. So in fact, that argument is sort of slightly swayed. And then actually in energy efficiency terms, a lot of aspects of energy efficiency are actually a good investment on their own, especially given the likelihood that energy costs will just continue to rise. Because if you ask electricity providers, they will tell you that electricity costs are going to double in the next 5 years. So energy efficiency has an investment potential in its own right. And I also wanted to say that there are some parties around that are actually desperate to fund energy efficiency programs. So, for example, the London Energy Efficiency Fund has money ready and waiting on a loan basis for anyone who actually wants to improve the energy efficiency of their buildings. So, I guess to conclude, I just wanted to say, don't panic, we're here, we can help, so you don't need to knock your buildings down.
Good. Thank you very much, Claire. It seems to me that if you just give the job to the consultants and they'll sort it out for you, but maybe that's a bit controversial. Sorry. So maybe I can press your buttons, as they say. Now, Mark, rebuild.
Yes.
Well, I would do if I...
You can just use the arrows.
There we go.
There we go.
Leave it to a lawyer.
Right. Good morning, everybody. As it says up on screen, I'm Mark Anstey. I'm a partner in the leasing sales and development team at Fairbrother. We specialise particularly in the Midtown market, but also in South Bank, and personally I advise both landlords, developers and occupiers on office premises. And I'm here to argue the merits of rebuild from a market perspective, i.e. the far less technical side. Slight caveat, what I'm about to say doesn't necessarily reflect the house view at Fairbrother. So if you want that, ask me a challenging question or come and see me over a cup of coffee at the end. The building we've got up on screen at the moment is 1 Kingsway, which was a complete new build behind the retained facade by UK and European. It sits down on the corner of Kingsway and Aldwych, and it set the current sort of high point in terms of rents in the existing market cycle. We achieved £67.50 there to the letting on the top 2 floors to Tate and Lyle, but it sort of set also a real sort of benchmark in terms of quality of space and also rental levels for that part of town. Click on one. Shall I reach over? There we go. So why am I saying we need to turn around to all our investor clients and tell them to knock their buildings down? Well, in terms of the market, the real sort of eye-catching big deals of the year have all been on the new build side. So the 4 buildings that we've got up here, the Amazon, or Amazon acquiring the whole of 60 London, the AXA development up at Holborn Viaduct. Bird & Bird taking a pre-let of the building directly outside the window here, which you can hear the works going on at the moment, 140,000 square foot. And then Publicis Group committing to almost 160,000 square foot between 2 buildings, one over on Chancery Lane and one up by Farringdon Station at the top of Turnmill Street. Just in terms of driving the market forward, we've seen fantastic performance from all 4 of these buildings in terms of rental performance, the addition of new quality space to the market, but more importantly, I think is the attraction of occupiers and the sort of the impact that will have on the area in terms of occupier mix. I mean, we wouldn't have imagined a couple of years ago that Publicis Saatchi would commit to taking 100,000 square foot on Chancery Lane. It's going to have a huge impact upon tenant mix and the impact that will have on the general area and the retail offering. Further afield, outside of Midtown, obviously we all know what Google will. I don't think Google quite know what they're doing with their building, but we know what they're hoping to do up at King's Cross. A fantastic building. It's really kicked on that whole development. We're now seeing rents up at the Argent development moving from sort of the mid-50s, as they were talked about in the summer, into the mid-60s already. So in a very, very short period of time, it's really moved things forward. And I mean, what they end up doing is still to be exactly defined, but in terms of trying to fit a 5-side football pitch into the middle of your building, it's probably really only something that you can do when you're starting from scratch. A couple of other things. 10 Brock Street, the British Land development, fully let before it launched. Walkie Talkie, obviously Natalie has talked about, I think 60% let during construction. The Shard, it's getting there slowly but surely. More and more interest we hear about all the time. The Place, fantastic transaction for the South Bank market, with News International committing to the whole 430,000 square foot during construction, and the Cheese Grater also space letting up there. All of them, new builds, and all of them attracting the key requirements in the market. So in terms of the occupier, what are occupiers demanding? Obviously, when Claire has talked about what you can do with a refurbishment, but you often do find that there are constraints. We've worked on projects recently where there are particularly slab height issues that may affect what you can deliver in terms of a specification. Can you fit in ceiling mounted air conditioning and a raised floor? Sometimes you can't. A raised floor will generally win out, as it's a key requirement for tenants. But also just poorly configured floor plates, and Natalie touched on, in terms of clear lines of sight, tenants being much more demanding in terms of the space that they take. And then retail. We are seeing a huge amount of demand from retailers in Midtown at the moment, but almost without exception they want large, well-configured units. And if you think about Midtown, the main retail pitches that we have in Midtown, Fleet Street, Strand, High Holborn, generally the units are poorly configured, small, which don't really meet the requirements of the modern retailer. Obviously a new build provides the opportunity to deliver bespoke units which are fully or attract the modern retailers. In terms of occupiers, we're seeing that more and more they need the space to work harder for them. Is that hangover from the credit crunch? I don't know. But in terms of fitting more people into less space, spending less on your property outgoings is becoming more and more important, and we're seeing occupiers look very closely at workplace audits, so that they know exactly how much space that they need to take in terms of how they use the space. Is that changing? Flexible working, hot desking, flexible bench style desking. It's about working with the technology as that develops and making the space work harder. But they need to know that if they do take a building and occupy on a flexible work basis, that actually when they're all there, that the building can support what they need. So in terms of air conditioning, fresh air, WC provision, lift travel times. It's very rare, it's very difficult for a refurbished building to deliver a true 1-to-8 occupancy building, which is what we're seeing more and more tenants demanding at the moment. In fact, we're working with a client where we're having to lose a significant amount of NIA just to get the WCs to comply with BCO, which doesn't get us anywhere near 1-to-8. We're also seeing that obviously tenants are becoming more and more savvy in terms of their own CSR requirements. As Natalie talked about, only taking buildings which have a particular BREEAM rating or EPC rating. And then will that therefore develop into a two-tier market? Those buildings that work, those buildings that don't. We may see that the buildings that don't, any costs that landlords have to incur or fines potentially being passed on to tenants. And equally, could the government start to look at business rates as a way of taxing buildings that don't comply, and therefore again having an impact upon the occupational costs, which, as we know, tenants look at occupational costs rather than rental levels. Thanks. And then just very quickly looking on the investment side, new builds deliver institutionally acceptable product. We've seen an awful lot of overseas activity in the market recently. A lot of overseas investors see London as a safe haven. So in terms of investing your money in a single let long-term income stream on a new building or a fairly new building is very, very attractive at the moment in terms of wealth preservation. The building on screen directly across from here is the Rolls building, which we were involved in. That sold upon practical completion for a yield close to 4%. So it gives you an idea, albeit that's to legal in general rather than overseas, but it gives you sort of an idea of the performance of a new build product on the investment market. So to summarise, it's the headline deals, new builds that are really driving the market forward in terms of rental levels and quality of space, with occupiers becoming more and more demanding about how they want to use space. We're looking towards new builds to really meet that 1-to-8 requirements, and new builds produce institutionally acceptable investment product, which is particularly attractive to the overseas developers, which are so prevalent in the market at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. So I think where we're at is that Alistair's got to recover from that fantastic tour,
Yes.
and obviously try and kick into touch the dominance of new builds in the current market.
Indeed, thank you, Tim. So my name is Alistair Dawn, and I'm an energy specialist with Wilmot Dixon. We're a large construction firm delivering both refurbished and new build properties in all sectors. Energy people aren't very thick on the ground in construction, and the reason that I exist in our organisation is to help our clients and the projects that we deliver give great performance. And I think that's the focus that I'd like to show you here, that refurbishment can give great performance, so can new build, clearly, as we've heard, but refurbishment has just, in fact, perhaps slightly greater chance of giving you the performing building in terms of asset and occupier requirements that you might want. So I'm going to take you through a little case study. I'm going to ask you to mentally move from the lovely environs of Midtown here to the southwest of England, to a building, very glamorous project, as you can see in the before condition. This is about a 7,000-8,000 square metre office building that was occupied by North Somerset Council. It's their town hall, in fact. A workplace for around 600 staff. Pretty ugly building, it has to be said. A great example of 60s architecture. Expensive to run. Lots of money going out the door in terms of occupiers' costs, and an energy performance certificate, as you can see there, of D. So we'll just get a little straw poll on the basis of that building. Deep plan building, lots of cellular space, not very flexible as a workplace for the client. Quick straw poll on knock down or refurbish from the audience, just to get a flavour of what I'm up against here. Just a quick hands. Are those for Refurbish? A few brave people. Yes, those for knock down and start again. Right. Okay. Interesting. So, thank you. So the client's brief here was to create a workspace for 950 people instead of 600, to change the space from cellular space to largely open plan environment, to significantly improve the energy and cost performance of the building. I get roughly a third increase, or decrease rather, in operating costs. So a third better performance is what they were looking for. So what we delivered for them last year was a refurbishment of the building, taking that existing building and taking it back to its bones, to its concrete frame, achieving a workspace with a good floor-to-ceiling height by working with exposed concrete slab soffits, exposed surfaces. Maybe not everyone's workplace environment, but it gives a very functional and a very effective workplace, and it's what you see in retail these days too. M&S and Tesco, everyone's going for exposed services and the bare austere look, and that's what was achieved here. Very effective workplace in terms of a conversion of the building by punching a large atrium through the centre of the large deep plan to give principally a naturally ventilated and extremely good daylight environment from a roof light system there, a bit of PV on the roof, contributing around 8 to 10% of their annual operating cost. So not a flagship project, but an extremely effective and above all project that delivered the client's requirements here. If you just flick on, please, Tim. So we put a lot of focus on this project in monitoring how it actually worked out for the client, both in terms of their workplace satisfaction and in terms of what it delivered in terms of actual numbers and savings for them. So we actually delivered more than a third of operating cost saving for them in this operating building, measured over the first year of its life, and a significant reduction in its actual carbon emissions in terms of that energy performance. So it's possible to achieve that kind of performance in a refurbished building. It's a great workplace for the staff, and transplant that to Midtown, although those sites are rare, and the same can be achieved here, as Claire has shown you. I'd just like to finish on returning to this performance theme. I think this applies equally to new build projects, and we're delivering this kind of approach on a £30 million new build project in the UK at the moment. But we also deliver this approach on the project you've just seen, is to make performance for the occupier and for you as the asset owner to be part of the client's brief, to set, in this case, an energy budget. That's not something that we're used to thinking of, but it's the same as a cost plan. It's just got energy numbers in instead. It's a pretty simple thing to do. It can take account of occupiers' energy requirements as well as base load, and the contractor and design team community are very happy to step up and deliver it. So I'd encourage you in briefing to think about that in your future projects, and of course to make them all refurbishments. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. I'm not sure if you've won yet, but we'll come back to that. But I think this is a first. We're actually on time. So I'm going to speak to some of my colleagues about how to do it on time. So that leaves us at least 10 minutes for any questions.
At the end of the day, I think you've got to look at each building on a case-by-case basis, whether or not you decide to refurbish it or you rebuild it. But for every pound that you invest in the construction industry, the economy benefits by about £2.7. So if you're making more of an investment, then you're actually benefiting the economy, creating jobs, creating better places for people to live, work and socialise. So on one hand, in terms of economic argument, it can be towards the rebuild argument. On the other hand, you can also look at refurbishment as less of a risk, potentially, lower investment, and you're actually retaining, just improving an existing building. So for many years to come, people can occupy that quite happily. But it just depends on the site. It all depends on and the developer, whether or not they decide to refurbish or redevelop. It's all about their own portfolio as well.
Thank you. I don't know if anybody wants to follow up on that, but I think I read somewhere that in terms of contribution to the economy, refurbishment is generally perceived to be better because you're using more labour as opposed to a large amount of materials which can come from overseas. So,
Yeah, I think I'd support that, Tim. Yeah, I think the local pound spend, if you like, however you evaluate that on a refurbishment, is definitely greater. We're not shipping in tons of windows from outside the UK. It's definitely a higher percentage. Even if the absolute cost is lower, the percentage is greater.
Claire, do you want to add anything on that?
I was just thinking about that on a sort of first principles point of view, that if you're therefore investing, you can make the money go further if you're doing 2 refurbishments for the price of 1 rebuild, perhaps. So that might be another aspect to it.
All I'd add to that is that I was advising an occupier who was potentially looking at stay put and a sort of retrofit of their existing space. And in the end, they relocated. But one thing they were looking at their existing accommodation was changing their lighting to an LED lighting system, much more energy efficient, longevity, etc. But the cost of doing that up front is still way in excess of a traditional office lighting solution. And in the end, they didn't do it. Although the long-term gains were obviously significant and energy saving, the cost is still prohibitive in some cases. So, yeah.
Well, to be honest, I don't get fully involved with that side of the business. I'm more on the environmental management side, but clearly on those cases, the refurb option just didn't stack up. It came down to a rebuild was the more sensible option. We do a lot of refurbishments, but it all depends on the site. I mean, example 20 Fenchurch Street, the amount of additional floor space that was created on that development is incredible. It's also an iconic building that's transformed the skyline of London, which is a fantastic thing to happen. But on the other hand, we've got great examples of some refurbishments. So it is really it's difficult to just sort of make a broad brush sort of assessment of these sites, because I mean, you know, some of the sites they're involving a number of different buildings that actually you look at the site as a whole and it would work so much better as one big building, and it actually really contributes to the local area with more amenity space, for example, or more cycling spaces. Whatever it's providing, it can really transform that area.
Longevity of buildings is therefore improved, or is it just inevitable that at some stage in the near future, the buildings being built there will also run out or become what are your thoughts on the inevitability of design?
I think that there is an issue, which is that the expectations are higher. So actually what's happening is that the designers are taking things too close to the bone, or much closer to the bone than they used to in terms of margins of error and things like that. Say, for example, on sort of innovative energy sort of designs and things. And I think that's almost ends up being a backward step, because you've lost the simplicity. And then when the thing that you design doesn't actually work in practice, then people will just default to turning everything on so as to avoid the complaints. And so the drive towards sort of search for efficiency in all ways, not just energy, but in loads of other aspects, sort of is counterproductive in the way you suggest. So some of it comes back to the design brief and being pragmatic, I think, and saying, hang on a minute, you know, we're pushing this beyond what's actually achievable in pragmatic terms. Let's go back to simplicity, because there are sort of various research sort of studies that show that if the most successful buildings are the ones where the design has been simple as opposed to complexity. So I guess in answer to your question, there are extremely good examples of very robust buildings that will stand the test of time. And that came from the vision of the client in the first place that says, I don't want overcomplication. I'll settle for something that, as a sort of definition of success, is not your ultimate sort of beautiful bells and whistles. It's something that actually, I'm valuing long-term performance. So it's about being able to value long-term performance and understand whole life cost-based decisions as opposed to just sort of capital cost-based decisions and sort of upfront money. Does that answer your question?
Can I just add to it? I think our approach is increasingly to look to the future, because we want our buildings to be adaptable and flexible, because when you look back, the way we are working, the way we are shopping has changed so much in the last few decades, and the way that we have to design our buildings is so that they are flexible and they can accommodate retailers who want more space or less space, or more storage space or less storage space. So the actual buildings are being designed with that in mind, and we're actually looking to the future to say, where is this market going, what are people going to want in the future, and is this building going to provide that? And we also look as well to whether or not that building might change in use completely from, say, an office to a residential. If we can, we look at potentially designing in features that would enable that. Obviously there's limitations, but the question is asked now, as opposed to designing a building specifically for a purpose and specifically for a certain type of occupier. We are thinking about different occupiers who will have different needs. We're also thinking about things like accessibility and the way that we actually will be working in the future. So whether it's technological accessibility or physical accessibility to the buildings, that's all being built in, and we're learning from mistakes of the past, I think. But there's always a limitation, of course, because sometimes you have to design it so that it's fit for a certain purpose with some flexibility. You can't always do everything.
Thank you. There seems to be a theme here which goes back to, I think, where I started with my friend Max, which was longevity and adaptability. I don't know, if in 2 minutes, one of our speakers could just explain to me what a building which has got longevity and adaptability, what does it look like?
It probably doesn't look iconic, I would say. That might drop out, so the headquarters buildings that are punching the skyline and that sort of thing, I think we might steer away from that in the search for longevity.
Anybody else?
But you might disagree.
I probably think the opposite, actually, because if you've got landmarks in the skyline that are iconic and are treasured, then in fact people make more of an effort to keep them and to reuse them and refurbish them, because it's actually about the quality of the building and the status of the building than just building lots and lots of boxes that don't necessarily inspire and actually creates a sense of that identity of that neighbourhood. So
I would agree with the aiming to aspire and the feeling of an iconic building, but to be a successful building in the long run, the building has to be a great place to work and live and
exactly.
whatever its function is, and that doesn't always go with iconic architecture, I would say. It can just as easily be achieved on a more modest level of architectural exuberance, you might say. And great examples of great workplaces, both refurbished and new build, that exist on a perhaps tuned down level, but ultimately achieving what people want in cost effectiveness of running for a longer period.
Mark, do you have a final word on this to balance
obviously, because I'm on the rebuild, I very much agree with what Natalie's saying. I mean, just look at just look at Centre Point, for example. Whether we think it's a lovely building or not, it is iconic, and it is a good example of something which is going to be completely transformed and given a new lease of life as a move from office to residential. So I'm with Natalie.
Excellent. Well, it's 9:20. I'm going to pass over a moment to Ian, Chairman of NBC, but in the meanwhile, I said we'd have a vote. I'm not quite sure what we're voting on, but let's just have one anyway. So we can have a vote on in an ideal world, would you knock it down and start again? I mean, frankly, with the noise going over there, I know where I'm going. Would you knock it down and start again, or would you refurbish it? So let's go for, and I'll make the final judgment as to who's won. Let's go for rebuild. Who's going to rebuild? So that's about 10,
At least 50.
20? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. About 30 odd. All right, refurbish. Overwhelming. Yeah. Sorry, guys. Anyway, on that very fair decision, I will pass you over to Ian.
Thank you. Tim, are you ready? I've got a couple more slides, I think.
Oh,
So
go on,
you might
sorry.
still be on
Yeah,
duty.
sorry. Here we go then.
I've seen progress.
There we are.
Yes, excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name's Ian Roberts. I'm Managing Director of a legal recruitment agency called Central Legal, and I'm also Deputy Chair of the Midtown Business Club. So on behalf of the club, welcome to you all here. It's lovely to see so many of you here, as per usual, and early in the morning. My first job is to say thank you to Natalie, Claire, Mark and Alistair, and to Tim for hosting. I think Refurbish did remarkably well there. It wasn't looking good early days, but from my point of view, I'm kind of staggered to hear that it costs as much, if not more, to refurbish, and that economically I think it was the economic benefits perhaps that swayed my opinion. I don't know if it was the same for others, but very informative. Thank you very much, as always, for giving your time. If we could just give a brief round of applause. Tim, thank you very much for chairing, and thank you also to Speechleys for hosting. Speechleys have been terrific supporters of the club over the last 4, 5 or 6 years, however long the club's been going now. Before I come on to upcoming events, I would like to say next year we'll be putting up again a full programme of events, some that are morning seminars and talks, etc., some that are more evening-based networking events. You're free to get involved and let us know if you've got ideas for events that you'd like to run or sponsor or host indeed. So please do let us know. It would be lovely to hear from you, and we're always happy to be flexible and accommodating and look at different types of events. So we want to hear from you about your ideas. Upcoming events for us next Tuesday, but again, the black tie to the dry cleaners, I didn't realise that was that close. But the balloons have been picked up. I don't know if anyone's obviously quite a few of you have been to the annual dinner before. It's a fantastic event. Sadly, it's just a sort of reminder rather than a push for tickets now, because it's a bit late in the day, but we're having our annual dinner at the Bloomsbury Big Top, which is in aid of Help for Heroes, next Tuesday. And then we'll be having a Christmas drinks reception at the Radisson Blue, which is where Pace Partners gave a very good talk a few weeks ago. And that'll be on Tuesday the 3rd of December from 6 o'clock. That's completely sponsored by Radisson, is that right? The Tottenham Court Road Hotel. More importantly, free drinks. Fine, free drinks all night. Well, all night whilst we're there. So that's I think that's open to members only. The Christmas drinks, but they're always good fun. Much more light-hearted, so it'd be lovely to see you there. I don't have anything else to say apart from we'll have more tea and coffee available outside. So please do feel free to stay around and network and chat. And thanks once again.
Thank you very much.
That's all right.